we have 5,000 Canadian Army, they're called Rangers up there, which are mostly Indigenous folks who are given a bolt action rifle and 200 rounds a year. And they patrol this huge swath of one of the largest land masses in the world with this great wealth.
Hi, I'm Ed D'Agostino, and this week I dig deep into what's happening above Canada, specifically the Arctic Circle. Russia and China are growing their military presence and shipping lanes through the Arctic. President-elect Donald Trump is threatening Canada with tariffs, and the Arctic may have something to do with it. My guest this week is Canadian journalist Jonathan Roth. He's the author of Resource Wars on both Substack and X, and he's a longtime friend. Thanks for joining us here at Global Macro Update. Jonathan, I'm excited to talk to you about all of this. There's so much happening politically in Canada right now, and you being a journalist, longtime journalist in Canada. I can't think of anyone more plugged in sort of what's happening below the headlines. So that's what I want to talk to you about. Can you just sort of set the stage for us? I mean, it seems like Trudeau, Canada's president, is like enemy number one for Donald Trump right now, which is, I think, confusing a lot of people. We're huge trading partners. We've historically been very close allies. What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau is in serious trouble. And I don't believe he can survive here over the next few days. He's probably done. But there has been a big lead up to what's happened here. Much of it precipitated, at least in the international arena, in terms of how the media is looking at it, since Donald Trump was elected back in November. So it seemed like Trump, the very first target he had was Canada, and announcing that he was going to slap 25% tariffs on the country. What lies behind that is there's, I think, a lot of things going on. One is there's clearly a personal animus between Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau. They don't like each other to the point that even just a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Trudeau himself was making fairly derogatory comments about Mr. Trump publicly, and even calling some of his voters, that they had somehow rejected, a female alternative for president a second time against Mr. Trump, and somehow making that look like Mr. Trump's voters were a bunch of misogynists, which probably didn't play over well with Mr. Trump at the time. Mm-hmm. But this has been going back quite a long time in terms of this. I guess there's consternation within the U.S. national security community, clearly, about what's happening in Canada and Canada's military posture and the amount of funding that's going into the military and Canada's ability to protect its own borders, which gets into the fentanyl crisis. And clearly, we don't have the same problems that Mexico has in terms of the number of folks coming up across the border. But we most definitely have people that are flying into Canada and then using what I think is probably the most trusting relationship between two countries to then, slip down from Canada into the U.S. So put that all up against that's kind of the backdrop of where we're at. Mr. Trudeau's, he's finished. So when his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, decided to, instead of standing up in Parliament and announcing that they had, overshot their deficit projection by 50%, at which point she was to make that announcement, and then the prime minister had told her just a couple of days before that she was going to make that announcement, and then she was going to be replaced by Mark Carney, who was the former governor of the Bank of England and governor of the Bank of Canada.
Trudeau wanted Freeland, to take the fall.
He wanted her to take exactly. So to stand up there and announce that, instead of spending our targeted $40 billion, we have a $40 billion deficit, which in itself is preposterous. But now it's actually over 60. So you go and announce that. And then, later on that day or the next day, I'm going to stick the knife in you. You're going to resign gracefully. I'll give you another position in cabinet. Remember, she's also the deputy prime minister of the country. And then I'm going to appoint this guy who's not even a member of parliament to, take up your position. So she thought about it over the weekend and said, no, I obviously can't do that. And in her announcement resigning, basically saying, I'm not going to make this announcement, she also, it was clear that she was, throwing down the gauntlet saying, look, I'm going to challenge you for the leadership, because she decided not to resign her seat. which, if she was leaving politics, she would leave her seat.
I slipped up just even when we got started saying that Trudeau is the president of your country. He's not. He's a prime minister. It kind of just goes to
maybe he's a monarch these days.
I guess that's one of the differences that myself and probably many other Americans are a little ignorant to, is just the subtle differences between our political system and your political parliamentary system. If the Republican Party said to Donald Trump a year from now, you need to step down, I mean, that just wouldn't happen. But when there's a loss of faith among your party in Canada, what happens?
Well, that's the thing. So just a few days ago here, at least a third of the MPs, Liberal MPs in Parliament, publicly have said he needs to go. So that I mean, he's definitely finished. But, the difference is because we have a parliamentary democracy and because we're a multi-party democracy, you have two parties. That's it. We have,
for better or worse.
For better or worse. And our system is, we have our own, definitely have our own problems. We have multiple parties in Parliament. And so the Liberals actually, to give you an illustration of how kind of convoluted and interesting the system is, in the last federal election, the Conservatives actually won more votes than any other party across the country. However, those votes were more highly concentrated to many Western ridings like Alberta, for instance, where all the oil is produced. So they ended up with less seats in Parliament than the Liberals did. So the Liberals actually had less votes, but they garnered more seats. But the Liberals were in a minority government position, so they don't have a majority of seats in the House. So they ended up partnering with the fourth place party in Parliament, the NDP, which is a left-wing socialist party, and cut a deal with them to basically be, any matters of confidence in the government, which usually revolves around finance, the NDP will vote with the Liberals to prop them up. So that's the way it's been here for the last, couple of years. Since Trudeau got in the last time here. But what's happened is that Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, announced a few months ago that he was going to rip up that agreement. I guess that was back in August or September, and said that, look, I'm not going to support Mr. Trudeau anymore. In other words, basically telling the Liberals, look, I might vote you down, right? Of course, the Conservatives, who, because Trudeau is, historically unpopular. Historically, we haven't had a prime minister this unpopular probably ever. And at the same time, the economic numbers in the country are, the worst of all the G7. So if you look at all the G7 countries, Canada's GDP per capita is actually negative since Trudeau got in 2015 compared to all the other countries in the G7 where it's actually ticking up. So things are going negative. Housing prices are absolutely, completely insane. No one can afford to purchase a house now unless you have dirty money somewhere or you're willing to take out a 40-year loan.
Looking back to 2015 from now, how has Canada changed? Because I have several friends that live in the U.S., but on or near the Canadian border, and then I have several friends, including you, on the Canadian side, and the stories that I hear about things like homelessness, and the housing situation and drugs. Like it seems like the last 9 years has been a huge shift. What are you seeing?
Well, look, you've been in my home before. I live about an hour and a half outside of Vancouver. And up until Trudeau was elected, you could drive from where I live, which is quite rural, in the mountains, into Vancouver. And it was, you're just driving along a normal freeway and, it looks like a regular, city. Well, now if you do that same drive, you pass multiple homeless encampments on the side of the freeway. And we're not talking small ones. We're talking big ones and multiple. Okay. Not just one, many across, as you drive into Vancouver. In some places where you're kind of like, what is, they've been taking over whole sections of off ramps off the freeway where they're all encamped because it's, basically kind of public land in a way. And then the police will move in, push them off. But that started up here probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where that started to be a thing where, everyone was starting to mention like, hey, what's going on? The drug situation, which is clearly connected to the drug situation where the similar situation to what's happened with you folks with opioids and, Oxycontin thing. And then, fentanyl crisis, all of that. Well, that's that's happened en masse here. The difference is that Trudeau came in with a very fully liberalized drug regime. So he's essentially made it permissible to have any, it doesn't matter what kind of drug, it's not illegal to have it, possess it for your own consumption. So, he started with cannabis, which many people in 2015, when he was originally elected, many people voted for him because he was the only leader saying we're going to, basically, legalize cannabis use, right? But it's gone from that to now, cocaine, meth, it doesn't matter what it is. If you want it, you can have it. And as a matter of fact, the government in many cases are actually supplying these drugs to drug addicts free of charge. So, that has absolutely impacted this homeless situation and the crime statistics that are right off the charts, totally insane. And then at the same time, you have this huge, cost of living crisis, which some of it's obviously tied to COVID and the amount of money that was spent. Trudeau has doubled Canada's debt since he came in 2015. So, we became a country in 1867. And up until 2015, we had a certain number, and he decided to double that over the last, 9 years. So, any way you slice it, Trudeau is incredibly unpopular now. And I think Trump took a look at what's going on with him, personally doesn't like him. And at the same time, what's happening in northern Canada and some of these national security considerations, even in terms of Canada's commitment to Ukraine, what's happened there. Canada made a lot of promises in terms of weaponry that would be sent there that has not materialized. We might have sent Ukraine 14, 15 tanks because that's pretty much all we have that actually run. So, there are a lot of problems. And I think Trump decided to press some of these buttons because they're also concerned in particular about what's happening in the Arctic, and Canada's, starting to take it seriously, but not as seriously, I think, as your country would like.
Well, that's how this interview came about, right? I jokingly sent you, I saw an article flash on my screen about Trump trolling Trudeau, suggesting that Canada become the 51st state of the U.S. And I jokingly sent it to you and, said, welcome to the U.S. And you wrote back, being more serious, saying this is all about the Arctic and protecting the Arctic and naval bases in the Arctic. That's really intriguing and interesting and not being broadcast anywhere, at least not in mainstream media. So what do you think the issues are? When I look at a map of the Arctic, it's kind of illuminating, essentially 50% of the landmass in the Arctic Circle is Russia, and then 50% is our NATO countries. That's a lot to compete with. Russia has a lot of military bases in the Arctic Circle. There aren't that many in the NATO countries. What's the concern?
Here's maybe the best way to illustrate it. So there's an Arctic Council. It consists of 8 countries. Russia's one of them. Canada is one of them. The United States is one of them. All the other countries are, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. All the rest of, so 7 of the 8 are actually NATO members. Russia currently is suspended in terms of any sort of consultations with the rest of the members. But those are the 8 countries that are, that have direct, borders right into the Arctic. Now, the interesting thing is that in 2018, China declared itself a near Arctic nation and basically announced to the world that they were going to take a serious look at what's happening in the Arctic and get involved there. And, to kind of put to really tie it together here, Canada has one icebreaker that's capable of, polar capable icebreaker. The United States has 2. They could potentially have 3 up there. Now, both countries have icebreakers that are under construction. But in Canada's case, we have 2 new ones coming online, and they're not going to be available until 2030. So they're under construction right now. Russia has 40. China has 3. So, there's no question that just from that capability, China and Russia are, greatly, outweigh any capability that Western countries have. At the same time, the amount of, as I said to you in the note that I sent, there's a ton of mineral wealth and oil and gas wealth in the Arctic that's never been tapped. So to kind of put it in perspective, in Canada, just in one little section called the Beaufort Sea, which actually there's Canada and the U.S. have a boundary dispute over that between Alaska and Yukon and Northwest Territories. But In the Beaufort Sea, there's roughly 100 to 140, 150 billion dollars worth of natural gas just within Canada's economic zone. And that's a very small, if you take a look at the Arctic Ocean, all the ocean that goes through Canada's Arctic, this is just one little small portion, right? Trudeau put a moratorium on that. So there is no drilling. There's no oil exploration allowed. But that's just what we know in terms of the value, in terms of what Canada has. It's probably many times that just in the oil and gas wealth, not to mention the minerals of which rare earths are probably the primary thing that people are chasing up there, but there's a lot of gold mines, that sort of thing. So there are huge national interest, things that Canada has, that we simply don't have the military capability to protect. And I think the U.S. is looking at what's going on in Ukraine and looking, China and Russia. I'm sure you and your viewers or listeners have probably looked into this situation where now China and Russia have partnered in terms of using a northern sea route to take goods from Shanghai up all the way around Russia to Rotterdam, which basically is like 2/3 of the distance that it would be normally, to go to the southern sea route up through the, Indian Ocean, up through the Suez Canal and such. And obviously there's a lot of, you got pirates and the Houthis and, the situation in Israel and everything that they have.
Dangerous neighborhood
that the Chinese have to deal with. So they're already pushing vessels through that way. Same exact things happening in northern Canada, where they suspect, soon within the next, 10 to 20 years, it will be totally feasible for ships to be, running trade routes through the northern route. So, bypassing the Panama Canal, that sort of thing, which will cut off a lot of, transportation time. So it's becoming incredibly strategic. And my own take is that this is a negotiation. He knows Canada can't support it militarily, which we can't. We have 5,000 Canadian Army, they're called Rangers up there, which are mostly Indigenous folks who are given a bolt action rifle and 200 rounds a year. And they patrol, this huge swath of, arguably one of the largest, it's one of the largest land masses in the world with this great wealth. Well, the truth is, can they compete in an environment where you're facing, peer competitors with Russia and China who can project power, just as well, much better than we can, and, are in some ways, even potentially, just in the icebreaker situation, for instance, much better equipped to do it than the U.S. is. So there's a lot to consider there. And my own take is that Trump is saying, look, we're concerned about what's happening there. We need to put a base there. And so we have better eyes there to see what's going on. And, what better way to do it than to put pressure on Trudeau the way he is. And, and he's even talked about Greenland now, or, this past weekend. So it's clear that they see that the Arctic is becoming incredibly important and strategic. And this is a way to push us, in particular the Canadians, to get in line. And I take a long time with the answer here, Ed, but just to kind of put a bow on it, when Trudeau went down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with him back on November the 29th, so this is after Trump announced these 25% tariffs on Canada, and Trudeau immediately went down to meet with him, had dinner. 10 days or 11 days later, Canada's foreign minister announced a new northern policy as to how Canada would interact with its northern territories, which took a lot of criticism here within Canada because it seemed pretty, put together, in a big hurry. But what was interesting about that was that the Arctic was not called Canada's Arctic in the actual documents. It was called the North American Arctic. So I think there's already, to somewhat maybe a capitulation in terms of Canada saying, look, we understand what you want. We actually understand there's a need for it. And, let's talk.
How do you think this shakes out? What happens to Trudeau? You say he's done. So say he resigns. Does someone like Chrystia Freeland, does she step in? Is there a new vote? If there's a new vote, who is likely to succeed Trudeau?
Well, whoever does succeed Trudeau, it's a poison chalice. So currently as it's constructed right now with the way the polling works, if there were an election to be held today, the Liberals would be very lucky to still have party status in Parliament. So they would end up with around 14 seats. They have over 170 now. So they would be completely decimated. And the Conservatives would end up with a historic majority of 220 seats or some crazy thing. So the Liberals
this
would
is existential for the ruling party.
Oh, it's the party is in very, very serious trouble, and I think that's why the Liberals have always been within the Canadian context have considered themselves the natural rulers of Canada because they would take some left positions, even some right positions, but they were a very centrist party. And under Trudeau, they have moved definitively over to the left. And that leftward motion, in terms of, politically, I think has really ostracized a lot of Canadians, especially economically. We have just some of the interesting things that he's just done over the last, year and a half, 2 years. Our capital gains taxes, went up by another third. He decided to, just a couple of weeks ago, decided all of a sudden to, take pretty much all the guns that are left. I'm a gun owner. I have 222s. He's taking 22 caliber rifles, There are many things along this front that he's done, that are unpopular. The most unpopular thing is that he has this national carbon tax, which dramatically raises the price of gasoline and undoubtedly contributes to inflation. He says it doesn't. Every independent study says it does. And I think just, doing your own math.
Staying out of the science, just if you make energy more expensive, that causes inflation. I just a fifth grader could figure that one out.
He just refuses to, reason with that. And the last thing he did, which was very unpopular and viewed as across the country as just trying to buy votes, was a couple of weeks ago he announced that there was going to be a holiday on our GST tax here, which is a 5% tax on any goods and services in Canada. And there was going to be a holiday on that over the holidays on certain items, only on certain items. So, for instance, if you bought a Lego set for your child, you didn't have to pay GST, as a present for your child. But if you bought that same Lego set, for your grandfather, because he likes playing Lego in the old folks' home, you're going to pay GST on that. So incredibly confusing for retailers, a nightmare to work with because it's a temporary thing, right? Just for a few weeks. And I think that's, from the public's perspective, they're like, look, you're trying to bribe us with our own money. So what happens next? Who the next leader is going to be? There'll be an interim leader when he steps down. It really depends, if we're going to have an election soon because, the leader of the NDP finally announced last week that he would bring a non-confidence motion. And so the problem there is that he doesn't have even an option to, he doesn't have a time slot in Parliament to do that until March. Well, Mr. Trump's taking office in January. And if those 25% tariffs come in and the Canadian government has not addressed that, you're going to have very serious protests. It's going to be really bad. So we could end up with an election really, really soon.
Let me put a couple statistics out there that I found before we spoke, right? Just to kind of put it in perspective economically, right? So Canada was the largest purchaser of U.S. goods in 2022, were the most recent data. So they purchased 17.3%. You purchased 17.3% of our exports, which that's the number that I hear getting tossed around in mainstream media. With the angle of, look, you are the number one, Canada's the number one customer of the United States. Why would we be antagonizing you? But what they usually don't say is the other side of the coin, right? And the other side of the coin is that the U.S. typically purchases on any given year over 75% of Canada's exports. So the trade balance on a dollar basis is fairly even between the U.S. and Canada, but we purchase a lot more Canadian exports than the other way around. It really is a big deal. A 25% tariff on goods coming into the U.S. from Canada would really, really hurt Canada.
We have to come to the table, and we essentially have to capitulate's too strong of a word, but we definitely need to make an agreement that works for you, right? Because whatever that agreement is, it's going to continue to work for us. So one way or the other, I think that's going to happen. I think the problem is that the longer that Trudeau sticks around, He's a lame duck leader. He has no moral authority to lead anymore. He cannot lead this negotiation. And the amount of time needed for a liberal leadership convention. So you can actually have a leadership race while the party is still running the government in Canada. So you could have a leadership race. Well, usually that takes months. Well, we don't have months in this situation. So whatever's going to happen, I mean, it is really topsy-turvy. I think the Canadian public, the polling is saying, overwhelmingly wants an election. And so that's why I suspect we might even end up with one, in January, at which point maybe, your government decides to kind of hold back before they do anything, depending on what happens there. I think Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservatives, will end up being prime minister. And although I think he will play, the best hardball he can with Mr. Trump, but I think he's probably more aligned on some of the issues that are antagonistic towards the Americans, and will probably be more, willing to make a deal. He'll have to, this is the same as the negotiation between, Putin and Trump. Trump cannot be seen to lose that, negotiation, as Putin cannot be seen in his country to, lose that. It's the same here, right? No matter who the leader is, whether it was Trudeau or Poilievre, if you're seen to losing to Trump in a negotiation, it's not good politically. So we'll see what happens, but it needs to be sorted out really quickly, because this relationship, just on the this auto pact that we have between Canada and the U.S. is essential to both countries, right? The economy in Michigan would be decimated if those 25% tariffs happen.
The big three could not produce cars if there was a blockage at the border.
We are extremely integrated.
I mean, you sit there now and it sounds pretty bleak, but the reality is it sounds like there's big change on the horizon. Are you hopeful about that change?
I am hopeful. I do think that, at least domestically, the problems that we're having, especially around the cost of living and the housing situation in particular. Look, I mean, the real estate issue is an issue globally, right? You go to any international city, the real estate's totally outrageous. So how, that is going to be addressed here, that is a very difficult policy fix. And they can say whatever they want, but, Mr. Poilievre can, but that's going to be more difficult to fix. Internationally, I think Canada will be, there will be many things that will be, I think, probably, better. The military, really, really needs work. We spend, it's like 1.3% of, GDP. The number's supposed to be 2 in NATO officially. That spending, Trudeau's promised for it to go up. I think it's going to go dramatically up. So that will likely get fixed. There's also an issue, which I haven't even mentioned, but there's been a huge foreign interference scandal in Canada that's been brewing over the last couple of years. And I think that will probably be put to bed, but that essentially really, I mean, there's been 2 countries involved, India and China, but China's been the heavyweight that's been intimately, interfering in our political situation to the point of, very, very strong concern about what's been going on. So I think that will likely be fixed as well, which is, I mean, I've been told by folks that are on the Trump team myself that, that situation, the Liberal Party in particular, the closeness with China, that was going to end.
Is that economic? I'm assuming that's economic.
That's economic. I mean, before the Huawei, the daughter of the Huawei founder, if you remember that whole story in terms of what happened there, well, if you want to peel back and look at that, one of the reasons, or many reasons, but one of the primary reasons that happened was because Trudeau was in the midst of negotiating a free trade agreement with China, which would be catastrophic for the U.S. So if we allowed all these Chinese cars in and goods and everything in a free trade capacity, and then we're able to sell it directly down to you, well, NAFTA, or, the new trade agreement that we have between, ourselves and Mexico, and would be over. So I think a lot of these things will be looked at, really closely and fixed. The crime problem, as it is in your country, it's complex. It's multi-layered, and the drug problems that are going on, and this migration crisis that's clearly, to what degree it's being precipitated by our enemies, and to what degree it's just happening because of economics, will be addressed as well. So I'm hopeful. But I also understand that these challenges are immense, and they take political will to be, really tough. And, whether or not our leaders are up to that challenge, I guess I guess we're going to find out here over the next 2 years. I think we'll have a pretty good idea if these challenges can be really addressed and fixed, if they're willing to take them on.
Interesting times. Jonathan Roth runs Resource Wars on Substack, and it's a great Twitter account too, Resource Wars. Jonathan, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Ed.
Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below with your thoughts.